Family pressured me to give sister my apartment. I sold it to a stranger instead for cash only. My dad's palm landed flat on my kitchen counter like he was trying to pin the whole conversation down with it. "So you're really doing this," he said, staring at me like I confessed to something criminal, while my sister stood behind him with her arms folded and that watery, practiced look in her eyes. My mom kept shaking her head, whispering, "I can't believe you," over and over like a prayer. And in my pocket, my phone buzzed again, my real estate agent's name flashing on the screen, because the buyer had just signed the unconditional contract and wired the deposit. My chest felt tight in that way where you can't get a full breath, like the air in the room was suddenly too thick to move through. I could smell my own coffee going cold, that bitter burn scent mixing with the lemon cleaner I'd used that morning, and I remember thinking, absurdly, I should have taken the trash out before they came. "Answer me," my dad snapped. Louder now, like volume could force me back into being the daughter he could steer. He pointed at the hallway, at the coat hook where my keys hung, at the framed print I'd bought on a holiday, at the small, quiet life I'd built without asking them for anything. "You'd rather sell it to a stranger than help your own sister." My sister, Talia, finally spoke, voice trembling with righteous hurt. "I can't believe you hate me this much," she said, and I felt something inside me go hot and then oddly numb. I stared at her and realized she wasn't asking. None of them were. They were reacting to a decision they'd already made in their heads, where my apartment was never really mine, just a spare resource the family could redistribute when Talia needed it. It was a Thursday night, 3 months earlier when all of this started, when my mom rang me and didn't even say hello properly. She went straight into it with this false bright tone she uses when she's about to deliver news she expects you to accept. "So," she said, "Talia's going to need somewhere to stay for a while, and we were thinking your place is perfect." Not asking if she could stay, not wondering if I'd be okay with it, just deciding. I was standing in the aisle at Woolies holding 2 different pasta sauces, feeling stupidly torn between basil and garlic, when my mom said, "It's only fair, sweetheart. You don't have kids. You've got space." I didn't even answer right away. I just stood there with my basket digging into my forearm, listening to that familiar family logic unfold like it always did. Talia is in crisis. Therefore, everyone must rearrange their lives to cushion her landing. The fact that I'd spent years rearranging my life so I wouldn't be dependent on them apparently didn't count as a reason I could say no. It just made me more usable. Talia is my older sister by 2 years, and if you ask my parents, she is the sun. Everything orbits her. Growing up, she was spirited, sensitive, too smart for school, going through a lot. I was independent, easy, mature for my age. That sounds like praise, but in our house it translated into, Talia gets support. You get expectations. If Talia forgot her lunch, Dad would leave work to bring it to her. If I forgot mine, Mom would say, "Well, you'll remember next time." If Talia failed a unit at TAFE, it was because the teacher didn't understand her. If I got a B instead of an A, it was because I didn't apply myself. By the time we were adults, the pattern was baked in. Talia moved out, moved back, moved out again. She dated men who didn't appreciate her, had dramatic breakups, dramatic reconciliations, dramatic fresh starts. My parents floated her emotionally and financially like it was their job, and maybe it was in their minds. She had 2 kids with a guy who was charming in public and useless in private. When it blew up, again, she ran back to my parents' place with boxes and laundry bags and the kids' school uniforms shoved in a plastic tub. It was chaos, and my mom called it family. I built my apartment life quietly because I didn't want chaos. I bought the place 5 years ago, a small 2-bedroom unit in a block that always smells faintly like someone's cooking onions. It's not fancy. The carpet is old. The bathroom fan rattles. But it's mine. I saved like a lunatic for the deposit. I picked up weekend shifts. I didn't go on holidays. I drove a car with a window that wouldn't roll down properly for 2 summers straight. I did all of that while listening to my parents tell me, "Don't be so hard on yourself," as if my effort was a quirky personality trait instead of the thing holding my life together. So when Mom said, "Your place is perfect," My first instinct was to laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so familiar it almost didn't feel real. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice even, my place is my home. What exactly are you suggesting? There was a pause. The kind that means she's annoyed, she's being forced to say it out loud. Well, she said, Talia could move in there. You could stay with us for a bit, or she made a small sound like she just thought of a clever solution. You could rent somewhere cheap. It's temporary. Temporary. In my family, temporary means until Talia is comfortable, which is another way of saying forever. I'd seen this movie. When Talia moved into our parents' spare room, temporarily, after her first breakup, she stayed 18 months and redecorated the room like it belonged to her. When Mom let her store a few things in the garage became a graveyard of Talia's abandoned plans. I said no. She can't just have my apartment. Mom's voice cooled instantly. Mara, she said, using my full name like a warning, she has children. And I have a mortgage, I replied, and I hated how sharp my voice sounded even though the point was simple. I can't move out of my own place, so she can move in. Then Mom dropped the line they always drop when they don't like your boundary. I thought you cared about your family. I remember standing there in the supermarket, staring at a shelf of sauce like it had personally offended me, and feeling my eyes burn. Not because I was about to cry in Woolies, although honestly, I was close, but because I was so tired of being cast as the selfish one for not volunteering to be the family spare part. Talia rang me later that night. She didn't say hello either. She went straight into the soft, wounded voice she uses when she wants you to feel guilty. I didn't want to ask, she said, but Mom said you were being weird about it. Being weird. That's what boundaries are called in my family. I'm not being weird, I said. I'm saying no. There was a long silence, and then she sighed like I was exhausting. So, you wanted to be homeless? She asked. You're not homeless, I said, trying not to lose it. You're at Mom and Dad's. You have a roof. Yeah, she said, voice rising, with 2 kids in one room. It's humiliating. And you have a whole second bedroom that you use as what, a yoga room? A storage room? You don't even need it. That's the thing about people who feel entitled to your stuff. They talk about it like it's wasted on you. Like your life is only valid if it serves theirs. It's my home, I repeated slower this time. You can't just take it because you want it. Talia sniffed. Wow, she said. Okay, I see you. You've changed. I almost laughed again. I hadn't changed. I just stopped automatically folding myself into whatever shape she needed. For a few days, I thought it would die down. That they'd sulk, then accept it, then find another solution. I was wrong. It escalated the way things always escalate in families that don't respect no. Mom started sending me listings for nice rentals near their house like she was helping. Dad started calling with practical questions about my mortgage like he was gathering intel. Talia started showing up at my place unannounced with the kids, acting like she was just visiting while making comments like, the kids could do their homework right there, and this room would be perfect for their bunk beds. Once, I came out of the bathroom and found her measuring the second bedroom wall with her phone, like she was planning furniture. I said, what are you doing? She didn't even look embarrassed. Just seeing if the dresser would fit, she said, like it was normal. No, I said louder. Stop. This isn't happening. She rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic, she muttered, and then she turned to my niece and said brightly, Auntie Mara is just stressed. Stressed. Dramatic. Weird. That's the vocabulary they use to make you doubt yourself. The final straw came when my dad turned up with Talia in a trailer. A literal trailer. They parked it in my allocated spot like they owned the building. Dad knocked once, and then let himself in with the spare key my parents had because, years ago, I'd made the mistake of thinking family having a spare key was normal. I walked into my lounge room and saw my father standing there with Talia behind him, and Dad said, we're just going to move a few things in. Don't make a scene. I remember my vision narrowing, my heartbeat thumping hard in my ears. Get out, I said, and my voice sounded strange, too calm, like my body had switched into survival mode. Dad blinked. Excuse me? Get out of my apartment, I repeated. Right now. Talia scoffed. You can't be serious. I'm serious, I said. You brought a trailer. You're trying to move in without my permission. Dad's face hardened. Don't talk to me like I'm some stranger, he snapped. We're your parents. And this is my home, I said, and my hand was shaking now. You're not moving her in? If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. The word police changed the air. It always does. Talia's eyes widened like I'd threatened violence. Dad went red. You call the police on your own family? He said, like that was more shocking than them trying to take my apartment. Yes, I said, because at that point I'd finally understood something. They weren't going to stop until I made it uncomfortable for them. They left that day in a storm of insults and guilt. Dad told me I was heartless. Talia cried loudly on purpose in the hallway so the neighbors would hear. Mom rang me later and said I'd traumatized the kids. Like the kids were harmed by seeing an adult set a boundary, but not harmed by living in constant instability because their mother refuses to plan. That night, I sat on my couch with my laptop open, staring at my mortgage balance and my savings and the knot in my chest. I realized the apartment wasn't just a home anymore. It was a target. As long as I owned it, my family would treat it like an emergency resource they could claim whenever Talia's life collapsed again. So I made a decision that felt both ruthless and weirdly peaceful. I was going to sell it. Not because I wanted to punish them, because I wanted out of the cycle. I wanted a life where my parents couldn't show up with a trailer and a spare key and tell me not to make a scene. The next week, I changed the locks. I didn't tell them. I just did it. Then I met with a real estate agent named Jody who looked like she'd seen every kind of family drama and wasn't interested in mine. I told her I wanted a clean sale. Quick, minimal conditions. I don't want subject to finance deals, I said. I don't want drawn-out settlements. I want the offer that can't be held hostage. Jody nodded like that made perfect sense. Cash buyer, unconditional, short settlement, she said. It'll probably be an investor, but that's not your problem. The listing went live, and I didn't tell my family. I know that sounds sneaky, but I also know my family. If I'd told them, they would have tried to sabotage it, call agents, scare off buyers, show up at inspections, and make it awkward. They would have treated my decision like a debate they were entitled to win. Inspection started. People walked through my home with polite smiles and calculating eyes. Couples whispered about storage. A guy in a suit tapped on walls like he was listening for secrets. I kept the place spotless and felt like I was living in a showroom of my own life. Then, on the third inspection day, a woman in her late 50s walked in with her son. They didn't gush. They didn't nitpick. They just looked quietly like they were picturing something practical. The woman asked me one question. How soon can you settle? For weeks, I said automatically. She nodded. We could do 2, she said. Cash. When I tell you my shoulders almost dropped with relief, I'm not exaggerating. Not because I was excited about money, because I could see the finish line. A clean break. No finance clause. No waiting. No chance for my family to wedge themselves into the gap. 2 days later, the offer came in. It wasn't the highest offer. It wasn't the best offer on paper. But it was unconditional, cash, and fast. Jody looked at me and said, if you want certainty, this is it. I signed. The moment the contract went unconditional, my phone buzzed with Dad's name. I didn't answer. Then Mom. Then Talia. I knew, instantly, that they'd seen the for sale sign or someone had mentioned it. My stomach knotted, but there was also a strange calm underneath it, like I'd finally taken my hands off a rope I'd been pulling against for years. They showed up at my door the next morning. No warning, of course. Dad knocked like he owned the place, hard and impatient. Mom stood behind him with her arms crossed. Talia was there too, holding her youngest like a prop, eyes already wet. Which brings me back to the moment in my kitchen. Dad's hand on my counter, Mom whispering disbelief, Talia acting betrayed like I'd stolen something from her. You didn't even tell us, Mom said, voice sharp. We had to find out from your aunt. Do you know how humiliating that is? I almost laughed. You're worried about humiliation? I said, because the audacity of that sentence in my kitchen was unbelievable. You try to move my sister in with a trailer. You let yourselves into my apartment. And you're upset. I didn't give you a heads up before you try to stop me. Dad's face tightened. We were trying to solve a problem. No, I said. You were trying to move the problem into my house, so it wasn't in yours. Talia made a small choking sob. So what am I supposed to do? She whispered. Figure it out, I said, and my voice shook slightly because it hurt to say it, but it was also true. The way I figured it out. The way you've never had to because Mom and Dad catch you every time. Mom's eyes flashed. Don't you dare talk about her like that, she snapped. Then don't you dare talk about me like I'm your spare resource. I shot back. Dad pointed at me, furious. You're selfish, he said. That apartment could have changed her life. It already changed mine, I said, quieter. And you spent months trying to take that away. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket and Jody's name popped up. I didn't even think. I answered because I needed something normal to hold on to. Hi, I said, voice tight. Hey, Jody said brightly, businesslike. Buyer signed. Deposit is in. Unconditional. You're all set. The silence in my kitchen was instant and heavy. Dad stared at me like I'd just announced a death. I slid my phone back into my pocket slowly. It's done, I said. Talia's face twisted. You sold it, she whispered like she couldn't believe I'd followed through. Yes, I said. To a stranger. Cash only. Unconditional. Mom's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't find a sentence that made her the victim. How could you do this to your own sister? She finally whispered. I looked at her and felt this wave of exhaustion, so deep it almost made me dizzy. How could you do this to your own daughter? I asked back. Because I'm also your daughter, Mom. And not once have you asked what this pressure has done to me. Dad stepped forward like he might try to intimidate me the way he did when I was 16. You can back out, he said. Tell them you changed your mind. I'm not backing out, I said, and my voice didn't waver this time. And if you try to contact the buyer or the agent or interfere in any way, I will get a restraining order. I'm serious. Talia's sob turned into a wail. You hate me, she cried, and my niece started crying too because kids feed off chaos like it's oxygen. I don't hate you, I said, and my throat burned. I hate that this is what you've turned into. I hate that you think love means taking whatever you want and calling it family. Dad looked like he'd been slapped. Mom's face crumpled, but not into understanding, into wounded pride. You're choosing money over family, she said, quietly, like she was delivering the final verdict. No, I said. I'm choosing my life, and I'm choosing peace. They stayed another 10 minutes, cycling through every tactic, guilt, anger, crying, bargaining. Mom suggested Talia could just pay a little rent, like that was the compromise I'd wanted months ago. Dad said I was tearing the family apart. Talia promised she'd only stay 6 months, which, in our family, is code for 18. None of it moved me, because the decision was already outside of them now. It was signed, paid, unconditional. And that was the point. When they finally left, my whole body started shaking like I'd been holding myself rigid for hours. I sat on the floor of my living room, back against the couch, and breathed through that familiar post-conflict crash. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad, and relieved, and strangely guilty, even though I knew I shouldn't. Over the next 2 weeks, the fallout rolled in waves. Mom would text me long paragraphs about family values. Dad would leave voicemails where he sounded like he was trying to be calm, but couldn't stop the contempt leaking through. Talia posted vague Facebook statuses about being betrayed by the people you die for, which was hilarious because she wouldn't even fill out a rental application without someone else doing the hard parts. One day, my aunt rang me. My mom's sister, the one who always tells the truth when everyone else is pretending. She sighed and said, "They're telling people you're selling because you're greedy." I stared at my blank wall, jaw tight. "Of course they are," I said. My aunt hesitated. "I'm not saying this to upset you," she added. "I'm saying it because you did the right thing, sweetheart. They've been using you as a backup plan for years." I swallowed hard, eyes burning. "It doesn't feel like the right thing," I admitted. "That's because you were trained to feel guilty when you don't fix their mess," she said gently. "Guilt doesn't always mean you're wrong." Settlement day came fast. I watched movers carry my boxes out, and the apartment echoed in that sad, hollow way it does when a place is no longer yours. I did a last walk through with Jody, handed over keys, signed final papers. The buyer's son, quiet, polite, shook my hand and said, "Thanks. Mom's been looking for something close to the hospital." He smiled like this was just a normal transaction, not the end of an era. And that's what hit me later, sitting in my car with the check confirmation on my banking app. To them, it was just a home. To my family, it had been a battlefield. To me, it was proof that I could build something without their approval. I moved into a smaller place temporarily, renting just for a bit, while I figured out my next step. The money went into an account my parents don't know about. I paid down my remaining debts. I booked myself a holiday for the first time in years, not because I wanted to post it online, but because I wanted to breathe in a place where no one could knock on my door and demand my life be rearranged. Talia, last I heard, is still in my parents' house. They found her a solution, of course. They always do. They'll complain about it to anyone who will listen, but they'll keep doing it because it keeps the family story intact. Talia is the one in need, and everyone else must adjust. I haven't spoken to my dad in weeks. Mom sends me periodic checking and texts that feel like fishing lines, little attempts to reel me back into the role I used to play. Sometimes I almost respond the way I used to, with apologies and softening and reassurance. Then I remember the trailer in my parking spot, the spare key, the way they said, "Don't make a scene in my own home." And I don't respond. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt. It does. There's a grief to realizing your family loves you best when you're compliant. There's a grief to understanding that the moment you stop being convenient, you become selfish. But there's also this quiet clarity I didn't have before. I'm allowed to belong to myself. I'm allowed to protect what I've built. And I'm allowed to choose a stranger's clean, simple contract over a lifetime of being treated like the family spare bedroom. Cash only wasn't about being petty. It was about certainty. It was about making sure no one could stall, no one could sabotage, no one could guilt me into just waiting long enough for them to wear me down again. I didn't sell my apartment because I don't love my family. I sold it because loving them was starting to cost me my life, one temporary sacrifice at a time.